Hi guys, welcome back to another installment of my video series Beyond Christie, in which I talk all things crime and mysteries, both in fiction and beyond. I recently replayed one of my favorite mystery video games, and I thought I want to make a video in which I dive into a few mystery/crime video games that were not only enjoyable from the mystery and the story itself, but also by being a story that the player can actively take part in and investigate through the medium of video games. So let's get started. One of the first types of games that piqued my interest when I started getting introduced to video games via my husband were games with a detective or crime investigation element, since that is a genre that I love in books since I was very young. I remember watching my husband playing through a game called Heavy Rain, and I remember being completely floored by the twist and the reveal at the end. In this game, you take on the role of 4 different characters in turns, and you basically investigate the crimes and also try to stop the so-called origami killer, who is a serial murderer who uses extended periods of rainfall to drown his victims. The gameplay is not overly complex, as you interact with the environment and characters through dialogues and QuickTime events by just pressing certain buttons on the controller at a correct moment. The game also introduced me to a powerful narrative element, in my opinion, that is used more and more in video games, and that is multiple alternate endings that really make the player feel like the decisions that they make really matter. Another detective game I enjoyed watching was Noire. It's set in 1950s Los Angeles, and we follow a detective called Cole Phelps as he rises among the ranks of the LAPD and solves a range of cases across 5 divisions. The first being the Black Dahlia case, which is directly inspired by the real-life and heavily mediatized crime case of the brutal murder of Elizabeth Short in 1947 in Los Angeles. A major gameplay feature is a vast open-world design, which enables the player to explore Los Angeles and its surroundings. Apart from the shooting and car chase sequences that aren't really my thing, I really enjoyed the investigative aspects of the gameplay, looking for clues on the crime scene, drawing your own conclusions, and interrogating suspects with just the right amount of facts to kind of intimidate them and make them confess. The 1950s noir novel style setting is very, very atmospheric in this game and shines through, particularly I think, through the really cool soundtrack and really good voice acting. Another less conventional take on the crime investigation story can be found in a stealth adventure game called Murdered Soul Suspect. It's set in a fictional version of the infamous town of Salem in Massachusetts in the present day, and its story centers on Ronan O'Connor, who is kind of a petty criminal turned detective, and within the first minutes of the game, and it's not a spoiler, he is killed by the serial killer he is trying to hunt down. He returns in the form of a ghost and is set on a quest to discover the identity of his killer in order to reach the afterlife. This kind of sounds like a tropey plot, but it's actually developing into a really interesting story as the game goes by, and it's constantly playing with blending reality and the supernatural, and the present, and the town's dark past. If you are well versed in the story of the Salem witch trials, you might have some clues in hand already, but I think still then this fairly short and quite story-heavy adventure still has some interesting surprises in store. The first mystery game that actually made me want to experience it myself as a player, and the game that I was mentioning before was the one that I replayed recently and really love, is an action-adventure game called Sherlock Holmes: Crimes and Punishments. The game is split into 6 different chapters, each containing one crime case, and 3 of them are directly inspired by existing Sherlock Holmes short stories. As a player, you attempt to find as many clues as possible by exploring the crime scene, interrogating and observing suspects in order to finally be able to draw conclusions. And you do that via the game's deduction board, which is a gameplay mechanic that involves linking pieces of information together. And it's kind of reminiscent of Holmes's Mind Palace. What I really enjoy about this game is that you really feel like a detective, because the game doesn't spell things out for you. This leads to different endings for each case, and you kind of have to trust yourself in the end that you convicted the right culprit. And also, in the true Sherlock Holmes spirit, there is the option of extrajudicial agreements and also sparing the culprit, which really makes you question your own sense of justice and right or wrong. Another enjoyable classic mystery-inspired adventure game is the point-and-click style adaptation of Agatha Christie's The ABC Murders. While I first had to get used to the pixel shader comic look of the game and the somewhat slow gameplay pace, I quickly got sucked back into this well-known Agatha Christie mystery as I embodied Hercule Poirot himself on his investigation of a series of curious murders announced to him beforehand by a mysterious ABC. There are slight differences to the original story, which makes the resolution a bit less predictable if you're already familiar with the novel, and I really appreciated the developers' attention to details. For example, the fact that when you interact with a mirror, Hercule Poirot actually rearranges his mustache, which is really funny. It's a really nice, short, and really affordable game for mystery fans. For those who like their crime fiction stories with a horror twist, I recommend checking out The Sinking City. It's inspired by H.P. Lovecraft's work, most prominently by his short story The Shadow over Innsmouth. The story is set in the isolated fishing town of Oakmont, Massachusetts in the 1920s. And there we follow the private investigator Charles Reed, who visits the town trying to find the source of the horrifying visions that plague him. While exploring Oakmont, he stumbles upon even darker secrets and ends up investigating the origin of an unnatural disaster that the locals call the flood that slowly swallows up the town's streets. The oppressive atmosphere, character dialogues, and world building are without a doubt the game's biggest strengths. Despite the controls in combat being really slow and sometimes frustrating, the story is engaging and suspenseful. And that's why I think it also makes The Sinking City a great game to experience by watching a playthrough, for example, on YouTube. I hope you enjoyed this new installment of the Beyond Christie series, and that maybe you discovered some games that you want to check out or even play for yourself. Let me know what your experience is with mystery/crime type video games, and definitely hit me with some more recommendations if you have some. I'll be back with more bookish content in the next video, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!